Alright, Chapter 10, Practical Circuits. It's not possible It's not possible to include with the description of every possible trick with it made with the act of the FCC communication. Desired coupling between the input and the output circuit with the undesired coupling can cause instability with the erratic operation. The tetra shown in Figure 10-1B with one to the principal advantage with the four element, the two with the distinct with the inner electrode capacity with the attributed with the electrode addition with the electrode screen grid with between the control grid and the plate the screen grid with another desirable effect makes the plate with a current with a practically independent plate voltage with the other specific range with the operating parameter with the screen grid, the operator with the pot with the potential with the respect with the cathode electrode with the track with the electron from the cathode tower with the because of the cores over the screen with the construct with most of the electrons drawn toward with the pass the right through with the plate with the well with the screen grid shield with the electron cathode size screen gear with the plate with the preventing electrostatic affix with between the two with the desert with the bolt booster with the passive with the electron with the tube. One disadvantage with the tetra with the intribute with respect to the second dimension with the action with the electron with the being knocked loose with the front of the plate. Present screen grid cause with the electron being drawn with the back over the screen with the reducing with the plate current with the limiting useful plate with the voltage swing. Pentoid extra grid serve with the check with the problem secondary with the mission within this device in addition with the element is suppressor grid with display between the screen grid plate sends with the element with the tie internally with the cathode with the lowest potential shield of the screen grid electron bounce off the plate. What is transit time? Transit time with a defined with the amount of the time to take with the electron travel the cathode of the plate with the electron tube with the type become with extreme critical with the extremely high radio frequency with the requirement of the specifically designed to with the very space with the between the cathode and plate. Other requirements for the tube with the operator with the higher of the frequency minimum inductance of the lead with the elements for the minimum electrode inter electrode capacity. In the electron circuit with the what is being by feedback with the type of the feedback of the vapor with the feedback with the defined with the transfer energy from the output of the circuit with the device back to the input. Most common application oscillated with the sustained oscillation with the inverse feedback with the signal with the amplifier to 180 degrees out of phase with the input signal to begin with the amplified with a high effect with the reducing distortion output with the amplifier. Alright, circuit the device back input. The most common application oscillator with the same with the output feedback some of the 180 degrees out of the phase signal and being applied with the distortion output with the amplifier. Current feedback to the inverse role with the developed the curve with the cathode biasing resistor with the triad with the degeneration with the ends with the decree with the distortion output. Feedback may be reversed referred to as output phase with the inverse degeneration negative with the current positive, such as draw with the symbol schematic with the triode and audio amplifier with the inductive coupled with a loudspeaker. Shift with the triode with the inductive coupled with the loudspeaker with the inductive with the impedance with the matching of the device to become the plate with resisting output with the audio input with the tube with the range of 1K to more than 20K, and while the load speaker with the mic with the anywhere with between 3.2 ohms and 16 ohms with the transfer of the head with the chain with the effect with the impedance with the output circuit with the transfer of the step down with the turn ratio with the provide with the speaker with the signal the proper impedance with the output voltage with the transfer vary with the direct with the proportional with the turns ratio with the transfer primary impedance with the usually established twice the tube's plate resistance with the give of the maximized undistorted output if the speaker with the 4 ohm with the turn ratio will be 612 to 1. To the speaker, the triode audio amplifier coupling. Drawing a simple schematic diagram of the two-stage audio with the amplifier with the using the transistor with the two-stage audio amplifier shown figure 10.3 with the direct coupler amplifier with the built-in compensation interior with coupling of the transistor with the merit 1 output with the input with the merit 2 with the coupling capacitor is avoided. Coupling capacitor, like with the transformer, tend to attenuate with low frequency transformer T1 coupled with the output with the microphone 1, base emitter transistor 1 with the first amplifier with the resistor 1 with the emitter swapping resistor over the variation resistant with the base emitter with the junction capacitor 1 with the bias with the resistor for resistor 1 collecting the load resistor 2 with the developed output signal capacitor 2 resistor 3 constituted with the low bypass filter the signal amplified again with the transistor merit 2 resistor 4 with the produce with the negative feedback the resistor 5 with the swing with the resistor second audio amplifier amplification stage capacitor 3 bypasses A signal with the round with the resistor with the R5 with the collector of the load resistor R6 with develop the output signal. 10-7 with the linear amplification employed with the class of the amplifier. Linear amplifier class A with the class A amplifier to define with the amplified base of the input signal adjustments over the plate with the current flow with the full 360 input cycle with the signal with the voltage with according to the definition class A with the operation tube. Transistor could bias at any point with along with the dynamic transfer of the characteristic as long as the signal is not large enough for the drive of the device with the cutoff with the class A amplifier. In the major application class A amplifiers distortion free output with the desired to achieve the bias of the adjusted so that the will not be applied with a DC operating point with the near the center of the linear portion of the dynamic transfer curve. Sometimes radio frequency amplifiers operating in class A be referred to with a linear amplifier amateur radio with the class A amplifiers now with a true linear amplifier. 10.8. Draw the simple circuit with the diagram that each of the following describe the operation show the signal source with the including coupling bypass capacitors power supply with connection plate load with the audio frequency ground cathode triode amplifier resistor base class A operation audio frequency ground cathode pentoid amplifier with battery bias class A operation radio frequency ground grounded grid triode amplifier inductor capacitor tank plate loaded with the class B operation triode amplifier audio amplifier cathode base resistor. The most common method of obtaining with a bias between class A amplifier 2 with an incorporated with a series with a resistor with a cathode circuit with the shown with the circuit diagram with the figure 10.4 with a circuit with the bias voltage with the developed cuff with the cathode resistor under question condition with no single state with the plate current flow with the continuous with the cathode plate back with the cathode with a series of resistors some of the plate with the current flow with the chassis ground with the cathode through with the resistor to with the negative with respect with the cathode. Figure 10.4 show the single source of the between the source of the voltage ES and the signal source is ES. Output signal side designated as EO. It appears with the grid with the succeeding state of assuming the voltage drop of the cathode resistor at 5 volts. This makes the cathode 5 volt positive with respect with the grid with 5 volt negative with respect with the cathode. Grid resistor part with the coupling network with the input signal within cycle with the plate current with the varying signal with the average DC voltage with the varying plate current flow with the cathode resistor with the sense of the required bias is the fixed voltage of 5 volts. The AC component of the plate with the current through with the cathode resistor must be removed. The complex route with the bypass capacitor for the cross of the cathode resistor with the capacitor acts with the short circuit of the alternating curve of the value of the capacitor is large and so the capacity of the reactance is small compared to with the resistance of the cathode resistor with the frequency of the operation with the audible range value of the audio applicant would be with the general range of 0 to 50 micro U frequencies. Value of the cathode resistor 250 ohms to 3000 ohms. Since the amplifier to base of the class A operation point quiescent value of the plate with the current versus the grid voltage must be established in the center of the tube characteristics linear region when the increased amount of the negative bias is in plate current with the will flow with the decrease of the bias with the most current plate will flow with the cathode resistor maintained with the constant negative grid with the potential 5 volts less assuming the no input signal will apply with the amplifier 5 volt negative bias over the 5 microamps over the current with the flow with the cathode to play input with signal AC waveform with the rise and fall with the out with the fixed reference form with the signal applied to the grid with the reference point applied become with a negative 5 volt bias on the grid with the signal stops the bias with precisely 5 volts. Signal goes positive with the grid bias drops below negative 5 volt goes positive then the signal goes negative with the grid bias increases beyond negative 5 volt level. The plate current with the direct current with the grid base of the grid does not go slightly more negative with the plate current with a drop consideration direct proportion negative going grid signal for 1 volt variation of the grid voltage of the plate current may be vary 10 microamps. Proportional variation of the output current is based on through the resistor of the plate lead coupled with the load resistor in accordance with the Ohm's law with the voltage drop of the resistor chain with the accordance of the current applied with the resistor the chain with the voltage brought through the chain with the current with the signal with applied with the next stage however the sense of the voltage DC cannot be applied with directly to the next stage of the upsetting with the next stage of the I. For the coupling capacitor, they use to pass the amplified signal with the block on the high DC potential. The variation produced with the plate current of the vacuum tube of the signal voltage applied with the control grid, exactly the same as would be produced by a generator developing a voltage have the internal resistance equal to the plate resistance of the tube. Those are the RC coupled amplifier shown in figure 10.4 can be with the representative equivalent circuit shown in figure 10.5 with the minus for the signs of the equivalent generator voltage used only to indicate the voltage opposite of the polarity of the single voltage to indicate the fact of the 188 volt phase shift between the grid and plate with a single voltage ground cathode vacuum tube with a cathode bypass capacity of the basing resistor admitted with equivalent circular emissions is permissible. First, we cover the capacitor of such size of the pass and place with the cathode and ground potential AC with the second, we cover the basing resistor consider the plate of the load. All the circuit with the continuum with the strong with the equivalent circuit with the effect with the ordinary triode with the amplifier with the fact during depending on the frequency, someone with the constant shown with the midget with the frequency sample the mid frequency range of the 200 to 10,000 hertz. With the experience electric capacity of the capacitor C. And C may be the admitted with the equivalent circuit with the impedance of so large that the opening circuit with the ground, cathode, and audio amplifier battery biasing. The circuit diagram shown with figure 10.6 with a single triode class for the A amplifier chain with the operating volts within 2 with the grid drive with the batteries with the bias valve with the interior with the signal with the source of the 8 volts with the set with the operating point for the 2 with the phase with the character of the input signal to describe with a single wave level the varying plate for the current output is labeled IB. The plate loaded with the resisting signal of the ERL output signal 180 degrees out of phase input and labeled output signal 0. Assuming the triode shown in figure 6J5 is 2 of the operating voltage illustrated under the no signal condition plate current of 5.2 milliamperes, plate voltage 220 volt, load resistor of 25 K, voltage drop a cup of the load resistor with no signal condition, so the supply voltage minus for the plate with 350 volts minus 220 volt, 130 volt, various output, various current appearing with a triode circuit with shown on the graphically with the figure 10 with the wave shift with the 10 with the following manner with the points A1, A1, A2, A3, A4 connected with the vertical dot with the representing the condition with the current with the quit and C with the no signal with the signal voltage with the graph A with the 0.8 with the total grid voltage B with the equal with the 8 volt with that point A1 which with the voltage by with the same time with the total plate current with the graph C equals 5.2 milliamperes at a point A2 with the DC voltage drops off of the load resistor with the refer with the graph and the graph is ELO and the D equals 130 volts over the A3 with the total voltage plate plate voltage of the graph E is equal to 220 volts at point A4. When the grid signal voltage reads the most positive value with the point B with the total grid voltage of the volts at point B1, maximum signal voltage of the grid cover the plate current to rather the maximum value with the 10.1 milliamperes of the point B2 with the maximum current of the cover the voltage drop a cuff of the load resistor make with the 225 volt of the B3 with the load resistor and with the plate resistance of the plate supply compromise with the shear of the circuit with the voltage drop of the cross the resistor L resistor inductance of the RP with the equal to the source of voltage with the voltage drop of the resistor inductance increase with the voltage drop the cover the voltage RP resistor power must decrease with the output voltage of the plate and the resistor plate with the must decrease with the plate with the cathode voltage drop the cuff of the resistor plate so the voltage drop the cuff of the resistor inductive maximum point of B3 voltage with a minimum shown on the B4 which equals 98 volts. With no signal, the same condition prevail with the C1, C2, C3, C4 for the point A1, 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 A2, A3, A4 where each of the most negative point, point D with the total grid is negative 16 volt with the point over the B1 minimum input voltage cover the total plate current to be 1.3 milliamperes with the point D3 with the turn of the minimum plate with the current cover the voltage cover the load resistor minimum value of 33 volts with the point D3 with the strength of the voltage over the cover the resistor inductancy minimum voltage drop of the maximum total plate voltage is with the maximum 317 volt with the D4 point F1 F1 F2 F3 F4 occurs no signal have the same in the numerical value with the corresponding with the C1 C2 C3 C4. For foregoing analysis of the node with the wave shape of the shown on the graph of the ABC with the day phase with each of the route with 180 degrees out of the phase with the wave shape of the E with the constantly found with the conclusion could be made with a single with a control grid electronic tube always phase with the plate current with the 180 degrees out of phase with the outer place output plate voltage statement holds true with the all type of electron tubes over the triode over the tetrode over the pentodes. Class B grounded grid radio frequency with a triode amplifier and inductive with capacitor tank plate load. In the ground grid amplifier 10A with a signal to apply with between the cathode and ground with the grid ground the output is taking the curve of the load between the plate with the ground in this case with the inductor capacity with the tank plate load. The ground grid circuit with the permanent with the triode with the operator with the high frequency need with the neutralization layer is one of the most objection with the drawback with the triode radio frequency power amplifier is overcome this and circuit with the ground with the radio frequency power with the capacity with the shield with the between the input with the output with the circuit with the preventing of the feedback with the energy result with the oscillation. Also got an advantage of very low output capacity with the crowd with the output with the apply with the tube with the between the grid and plate. And two, the design especially for the purpose of the capacity made with very low with large values of the inductancy made with the plate is circuit with the relative of the high frequency circuit with the result of the high frequency. Another character for the ground grid amplifier is the both of the driver shape with the supplies with the input with the amplifier shape with itself with the supply with the late load circuit. Driver stage produced with the radio frequency voltage curve with the input terminal with the radio frequency voltage is off of the producer curve with the plate with the cathode elements for the tube. These voltages are 180 degrees out of phase with the respect with the cathode, therefore the radio frequency output voltage plate for the ground and some of the two out of phase voltage. The plate current generally with 180 degrees out of phase with the plate with the voltage with the means with the signal with the current following with the cathode with the circuit with the become must be the same with the plate current with the cathode now with the heavy low impedance with the plate circuit with the heavy higher impedance. Therefore the tube act for the device with the transfer of the space with the current with the low impedance with the high impedance with the output with the proportional ratio of the out impedance with the input with the impedance. Because of the input impedance with it can be made small with the bandwidth of the input circuit with it can be varied with the great since the output capacity with the plate with the grid with the induction plate with the circuit with it can be made larger give the resonant frequency with the like with the output with the circuit with the must be with the broad with the being the class 2 amplifier 2 pace of the operation of the plate current cut off with the tube with the conductor with the during with approximately 50% of the total input signal over the period. So summary over the ground circuit with the ground grid circuit with the permanent tube with the over the triode over the which is lower noise figure does not require the neutralization however the voltage gain with the amplifier is not integrated with the ground scaffold circuit with because of the input with the impedance very low with the tune circuit with the light and little voltage set up to overcome the tube no over the noise performance tends to suffer the sum of the somewhat. The low impedance with the circuit of the permanent with the attainment of the very wide band with reasonable noise figure with a sacrificing to the much voltage gain with the input circuit with the gain of the ground circuit with the ground grid amplifier with the grid enough to override with the noise produced with the same converter with the tubes of the common practice with the first two with the ground grid amplifier with the cascade with the added complication of the rising with the necessity of the need with a special tube limited to use. Tubes themselves must have a very low effective end plate to play a cathode capacity shield with effect with the ground grid to be realized. Trouble the circuit diagram explain with the operation with the input with the output phase relationship with the approximate with the Prince practical with the voltage gain with the approximate stage efficiencies and use advantage for the limitation following types of signed audio circuits. The class A amplifier cathode resistor bias from the cathode following amplifier with the grounding plate. Cathode bias class A amplifier cathode bias class with the amplifier shown figure 10.9 with the no input with the output signal polarities phase relationship shown with the accompanying with the waveform with the eventual amplifier with the audio so with the characteristic input output with the impedances are high with the stage with the very efficient because it requires the current with the during with the 100% of the single cycle with a significant advantage with the high with the circuit with its freedom with the distortion also with the door that require very little drive for its excellent gain at the beginning of the alteration condition with the plate circuit with the tube with the identical with those with exist with the no signal condition with plate to ground voltage is 93.2 volts coupling capacitor is charged at 93.2 volts and with no voltage appear with the curve of the grid leak with a resistor with a grid during the first 90% of the phase signal, the plate with the ground voltage rises rapidly to 127.1 volts center of the voltage from the plate to ground 127.1 volt growth of the coupling capacitor is only 93.2 volt. The coupling capacitor attempts to charge with additional 333.9 volt. The charge path of the coupling capacitor is designated by the arrows figure 10.9. Electron leave the negative of the terminal of the ground and flow of the resistor grid of the capacitor coupler to the resistor inductor. 2 with the 5 of the terminal of the emitter bias. 3 with the emitter bias completing circuit. Note the charging of the displacement of the capacitor, coupling capacitor following the resistor inductor and resistor grid. 7 with the series of the resistance larger the time constant charge compared period with a sim wave being amplified with a charge time bouncing with a coupling capacity of 517 milliseconds with 100 kilowatts wave, sim wave period of 1 millisecond with therefore with the first and 90 degrees plate with a signal with a quarter of a millisecond, brief time with the 5% with the one type of the times constant with the capacity with can only begin when the charge with the new with the value with the plate voltage, short period of terms limited with the chain with the capacity during the first 90% and 90 degree single with about with 6% available to increase with a 33.9 volt actual increase about 2 volts in brief second and a single end of the class A stage of figure 9, 10, 9, and 10, 9 have these characteristics. It's a phase inverter of the output is always a mirror image of the input with the voltage gain the high considerably better than the ground grid and grounded plate circuit with an approximate stage efficiency is 20% or less. Circuits of the type of the circuits of this type of the ones of the depth of the chain with the audio amplification can be found in the obsolete strip of the system tape recorder with the radios. Phase inversion of the phenomena has been made with a circuit useful with the application with when a polarity reversal of the input signal is desirable. Cathode Fowler amplifier with the cathode Fowler and circuit with the shown with the figure 1010 with the utility of the advent with the transistor cathode Fowler with the circuit one of the most useful with a common basic audio circuit. Achieve the uniform response over the wide frequency range of the amplifier with it should have a low effective with the input with the capacity with the low effective load impedance with the overall response with the must also with the improve with the U with the day generated the feedback with the cathode Fowler with the possession of the quality of the addition with which may be the U with the watt marriage impedance of the one circuit with the two and another the cathode Fowler with a single stage class A with the D generated the amplifier output was appeared with a cross with the unbiased the cathode resisted the high input with the input with no great current with the low input with the impedance with the especially useful with the matching a high impedance source with the low impedance with the load. So here we have the signal out, signal in, a battery, resistor to a grid, ground plate Fowler, cathode Fowler, and ground. High impedance with the source of a low impedance load with the cathode with the Fowler with the might with between the pulse generating stage of the transmission line effect with the shot with the capacity that might be with great enough to cause the objection while the effect with the more power with the course of the develop delivered to source with the method with the low. For example, the conventional amplifier have a high output impedance which supply with a lesser low impedance axle line with cathode Fowler with a heavy output impedance with the corresponding with the load impedance with the energy with the obtained with the cathode Fowler with the can the and only with the price of voltage gain with a less than the unit D, however, the circuit D with a capable of producing power gain with a conventional cathode Fowler with the shown on the A with the characteristic figure 10, 11, and A over the no signal conditions are in the amount with the plate current with the blue, the RK with the follows established with the normal of the bias for the apply for the going signal with the reply with the grid and the plate with the current increase with the rate of voltage drop the cuff with the RK with the give of the cathode with the higher positive with the potential with the respect with the ground with the under with the no signal condition when negative going signal is applied with the grid with the opposite with the effect with the curve with the outer polarity applied with the polarity of the signal voltage applied with the grid and ground. The RK is now bypassed with the D generated both over the positive half cycle with the plate with the current through the RK with the increase with the base with the negative half cycle with the plate with the current with the RK decrease the bias moving positive half cycle with the increase with the bias subtract with the input signal to reduce the amplitude with the grid to cathode voltage during the negative half cycle bias adds to the input signal accompanying with the decrease from the bias with the reduce the amplitude with the grid to the cathode voltage thus in the half cycle with the peak voltage AC component plate current at the cease and output voltage corresponding reduced below the value with would have the degeneration with the present. Voltage gaining with the cathode Fowler with the lesson unity with the present theory of the operation representing the cathode Fowler with the ampere primary equals voltage ampere emitter primary characteristic over the triode amplifier with the figure in 10, 11, and C. Triode bias class A operation no signal plate with the current over the 0.08 amperes over the no signal plate voltage 200 volts of the grid. The bias is negative 4 volts, and if the bias with negative 4 volts develops a curve of the cathode resistor, the resistor element of the note plate, that the resistor of the plate supply voltage 200 plus 4, 204 volts, cathode resistance of 500 ohms, input signal inside to a wave at the peak positive with the value. Equivalent circuit is similar to the equivalent circuit with the conventional triode with the amplifier, some modification A, all DC voltage with eliminated only with the AC component are shown. Circuit contained with the voltage acting on the shear of the plate resisting the cathode resistor with the output with the voltage is equal to the voltage and the primary and the voltage cathode resistor across the load resistor similar to the feature of the character of the cathode Fowler. These points is presented. When the input impedance with the cathode valve with the high, with the output impedance is quite low with the distortion cathode valve with the extremely low, probably the lowest of the amplifier types. Input-output waveform, same as the polarity with no phase of the reversal take place with the common cathode circuit. Practical purpose with the voltage gain less than unity, although stages of it does exhibit the power gain. The cathode followers have been replaced with the recent with emitter valve with the source valve with the two semiconductor with the circuit exhibit some of the basic advantage for the cathode valve with the cathode valve recently have been standard out input stage for the signal and source of the impedance with the tender of the vary with the tape of the curve with the example of the alpha the microphone with the varying impedance and show the good impedance to make sure that the large plate takes place with the going recorders have the traditional incorporated with the cathode following input stage. 1010 when met with the amplification factor over the element of the trial under the condition of the amplifier gain and the approach of the view. Definition of amplification factor with the ratio between the small chain with the plane voltage plate voltage, small change of the grid voltage as a result of the same change of the plate current with an indication of the effect of the control grid voltage relative to the plate voltage. Control plate current and plate current expressed with the formula amplification as plate voltage over the grid. Amplification factor with the Greek letter represents a small change in the pure with the number of the reference units. Example: the 2 with the amplification of 100, meaning for the grid voltage required to produce a certain change with the plate with a current with 100 times less than the plate voltage change required to bring the same change plate current. In other words, grid voltage is 100 times more with the effect of the plate voltage with the influence of the center space charge of the consequent with the plate current. Illustrates above with the plate current change with the 1 milliamp to produce the plate voltage with the current of 10 volt with the grid voltage coupled to the nth volt produces the 1 milliamp the change with the plate current. Thus, the amplification of 10 over to 0 1 would be 100 with the amplification over the course of the 100. Emphasize place over the upon the fact that the change of the plate with the voltage change with the grid voltage there with the importance of an individual value of the plate and grid voltage during the application factor of the trial with the plate with the family curve the relatively simple process the simple select the grid voltage value shown in the halfway between the usable limits of the grid voltage shown on the graph of the two plate curves. Referring to figure 1012 with a negative 8 volt satisfactory grid volt located with the reference point with a halfway down with a straight portion of the plate current curve. Grid voltage is point A with a horizontal projection plate parallel plate voltage of the x of the edge shown point A being equal to 5 milliamps of the vertical projection. The downward plate voltage scale shown that A is equal to 216 volts. Plate A corresponds with the grid voltage negative 8. Plate current of 5 milliamps of the plate voltage is 216 volts. No project A along x-axis with adjacent grid by with the direction of the projection of the option with the inside of the total with a higher value with negative grid by with a point B with the grid volt and then negative volt of the vertical portion of the drop of the plate voltage exists intersect with the 257 volt point. Point B therefore the describe of the file with the grid point of negative 10 volt plate current with the 5 milliamperes plate voltage 257 voltage. Or the next step is to project with a higher plate with a voltage over the negative current with the result of the C point with the C correspond with the grid with a negative volt with the plate current 9.6 milliamps plate voltage 257 volt. Information needed to calculate the amperage to obtain with the 216 volt with the plate with a point C with a chain with a plate current with a 5 to 9.6 milliamps to take plate with a 257 volt plate chain with a grid voltage with a 10 volt point B and 8 volt point C. Goes a chain that plate with a current at 5 to 9.6 milliamps therefore with equation is 257 minus 216 over 10 to the minus 8 with a 41 over 2 20.5. The amplification realized higher, very high plate load resistant value of the load independent of the plate circuit with many times of the value of the two plate resistance. Words meant by plate current saturation. Plate current saturation is a point of the amplifier operating curve with a further increase of the grid voltage does not result with an applicable increase of the plate current with regards to the plane voltage of the point with the plate resistant with the electronic tube with the essential with the video with the trial with the amplifier load line. Figure 1013 saturation indicate with the point A with the graph the opposite of the end of the line with a point with a B with a cutoff point with the auto amplifiers operated linear region between the two extremes. What is meant by the load over the vacuum tube with what is the load line load. See with the resistance of the plate show with the figure 1013 with the load of the tube with the resistance labeled the R with the load with the factor determined of the operating condition of the tube with this on the primary mean with the amplifier operation analyzed with the straight line drawn across the voltage curve of the drops with the called the load line with the result of the over the plot with the value of the plate with the current plate voltage of the triode circuit connecting all the applied points with a straight line with the one extremely load line point where the plate current is 0 with the voltage drop across the load with 0 with the other extreme of the point with the plane current with this absolutely unlimited to the tube. This is the tube axis to show the circuit Current of the point at load limited on the load may be calculated with using omlogs from the tube to show over the plate with the voltage 0 with the slope of the load line is determine the load itself. Greater the load, less of the slope of the load line with the curve figure 1013 base with the triode circuit all shown. Figure 1013, when the factor to determine the correct with the bias voltage of the grid in the vacuum tube of the audio amplifier is bias is shown within the tube to operate closely with the possible trim of the line and transfer the characteristic of the bias point must do with no amount with the input and signal with the cover the grid circuit with the drum of the current with the class of the B amplifier, show for the type of the push level audio amplifiers each tube with the must be made with the operator during no signal stay within your cutoff let's with the lower or limited with the tube linear region. But for the control grid result of the presence of the grid and current between the grid and cathode to the system external to the tube with the condition that cannot be avoided because of the grid wires. Intercept the electron advance with the torque of the grid on their way of the plate with the positively charged with the grid attract the electron to itself. Disregard for the moment of any application of the permanent grid of the current flow with the presence of the grid currently normally undesirable. It's representative needless for the consumption of the flowers and the other wanted effect with the single voltage that normally applied with the control grid altering energy with the release of the voltage with the vary with the amplitude with the perhaps the polarity relative to the cathode during the time of the negative with respect with the cathode freedom over the grid current with the opposite for the most powerful with the grid current with the present unless some of the means provided to keep the control grid to negative the potential during positive portion of the input signal the purpose of the negative grid with the invalid the subs for the operating condition of the bias may be defined with the DC voltage between the grid and the cathode. It represents with the battery C with the figure 10.4 with the total voltage existing between the grid and cathode signal voltage plus with the bias voltage. Association between the signal and grid bias for the illustration figure 10.15 represents with the input with the AC voltage of 5 volt peak and the varies between 5 positive and 5 negative to keep the control grid and negative during the entire positive alteration over the input signal. The grid bias must be equal to not exceed the peak value of the input with the control guide bias is arbitrarily set to the negative 6 volts evidence and curve B with the civil the grid is negative with the 0 voltage reference level is shown by the reference voltage line resonant signal with the bias voltage of the control of the grid is instant by instant shown in favor of C with the same in the illustration curve with the C with the addition of the curve A and B is fixed bias voltage set up with the initial voltage relations between the control grid and cathode with no signal condition is and curve B is represented in 1 to 2 and 8 to 9 and curve A and then 1 foot to 2 foot and 8 to 9 and curve C the times 1 2 times from 1 to 2 and 8 to 9 and the curve representing the period is 0. Signal voltage during the time of the fulfill the negative 6 volt grid bias for the active of the control grid is shown on the times of 1 to 2 with the 8 to 9 with the curve C. Signal voltage shown with the right with the positive direction from the 2 to 3 with the both with the fixed negative bias with the control of the grid become with less and less negative until peak with the positive alteration signal point with the 0.3 control grid 1 volt negative respect with the cathode shown in figure 3 with the curve by 3 and curve C. The signal voltage decrease with the positive with the amplitude from 3 to 4 with the curve A with the more to more with the bias voltage of the predominantly until the point of the 4 is reached again with the corresponding 0 signal of voltage. Control grid will also become the 6 negative with respect to the cathode shown on the 4 on the point curve C. For examining with the action of the half second with the apply with the signal voltage over the 2 to 4 into the curve C with the evident with the 0.5 chain with the signal voltage with the positive direction taken place with the control grid, but the grid electrode remains with the negative throughout the half second with the during with the negative alteration signal voltage with the 0.4 to 6 with the signal of the negative by with the voltage adds the result of the chain of the voltage grid of 6 volt with the forward of the curve C with the maximum of the negative voltage 11 negative 11 volts over the 5, then return to negative 6 volt with the 6 with the control grid remains the negative restrict with the cathode with the amount with the equal to some of the instantaneous signal voltage and fixed grid bias. Drawing schematic illustrating following the type of the grid base biasing explain with the operation of battery cathode with resistive power supply with the voltage battery bias with the DC voltage supply with the grid with the cathode vacuum tube with the battery supply with the bias shown in figure 1014 shown with the battery positive terminal connect with the cathode so the negative voltage of the apply with the grid with the voltage appear with the grid to the ground is equal to the bias voltage plus the instantaneous value of signal voltage in the fixed bias with arrangement such as the shown with the bias with an independent with the input grid signal. Cathode resistive in the circuit with the bias with the voltage with the develop the curve with the cathode resistive under no signal condition plane current flows constant with the cathode to plate with the back with the cathode again with the resistor with the signal with the plate with the current flow with the point A to B with the A is negative. Respect with the B, but they assume with the voltage drop of the resistor of the 5 volts make with the cathode 5 volts positive with respect with the grid over the grid 5 the negative volt with respect with the cathode. The resistor grid with its power with the coupling with the input with grid signal the same way with the impress of the cross grid resistor grid caught with the plate with the current with the varying schedule average DC value with the varying and plate current flows with the cathode resistor with the required with the fixed voltage with the AC with the component with the plate current through the cathode resistor with the must be removed with accomplished with the capacitor value of the capacitor is larger than the capacity of the reactance of the effectively short circuit with the bypass AC voltage component with the cathode resistor. The result of the voltage drop of the cathode resistor does not vary. Bias voltage remain at negative 5 to 6. Power supply. The principal operation of the fixed bias with arrangement with a separate power is shown in the figure 10 of the fixed no negative value with the apply with the grid with the shear with the grid with the resistor. Note the cathode shoe join the diode of the grid bridge circuit with the connect with the ground with a negative voltage with the take on the edge node junction voltage divider. Voltage divider simply supplies the bias shown in figure 1018 electrons flow down from resistor 1 to resistor 2 with the top of the resistor 1 and negative with respect with the bottom of the ground with the power supply output with the 800 volt with the 116 with the total resistor. Resistor 1, resistor 2 is in resistor 1, hence 16 with the 300 volt with the 5 volts with the drop of the cost. Resistor 1 supplying with the required value of the current direction relative with the large slide with the divider. Resistor 2 show the positive with the 295 volts available the bottom supply with the bottom potential. 1015 so define self-bias. Self-bias is the bias control grid electronic tube with the gradient with the voltage drop of the undeveloped across the resistor with the cathode return flows. 1016 when I show with the connection external of the batteries represent resistive load with a single source with the would appear with the properly fixed bias common emitter with the transistor amplifier. The common emitter amplifier with the most popular transistor amplifier circuit shown figure 1019 with a tube type of the equivalent conventional with a common cathode arrangement with the common emitter of the circuit that has the highest gain of the amplifier types output waveform and inverter with a duplicate of the input signal. The principal difference between the input and output of waveforms if the output waveform is considerably higher amplitude with the input. However, the important remember to the output with a shift of the phase of the input with the precisely 180 degrees. The following expert of the transistor handbook with describe the characteristic positive and negative power of the L type transistor with a common emitter circuit with explain the significant each collector base voltage emitter open of negative 40 volt max collector emitter voltage base to emitter voltage negative 40 volt at 0.5 volts emitter base voltage negative 0.5 volt max collector current with milliamps max transistor dissipation ambient temperature 25 degrees Celsius with the operating rated at 120 milliwatt at max. Transistor dissipation case circuit at 25 degrees Celsius with the operating at a heat sink at 140 milliwatt max. Ambient temperature range operating range negative 65 degrees Celsius to 100 degrees Celsius. Rating transistors have the maximum rating with it cannot be exceeded with the normal operation expected with a similar menu with the transistor parameters for a minimum value of the voltage current which may be maintained with the specification of the device with the main English should be noted with the maximum with the minimum value stay with the specification should be considered with the limit with the other specified value with the normal within the specified limit. For example, the transistor operated maximum volts immediate maximum current at the same time with the device maximum power to dissipation capability probably be exceeded. Open emitter collector voltage designated BCBT with the maximum voltage that can be applied with between the base of the collector without exceeding the collector base junction breakdown point. Base consider the reverse bias of the negative 40 degrees Celsius. There is open collector, the emitter voltage designated with the V. The DC collector emitter with the breakdown voltage when the collector is reverse bias respectively emitter of the emitter junction reverse bias with a specific circuit of 0.5 of the emitter volts emitted at a base voltage. Voltage designated as the DC emitter base breakdown voltage of the emitter reverse bias with respect with the base of the collector. Open collector current reading specified with the maximum current with the may be detained with the overheating with the transistor particular significant specification power with the transistor low collector current of 10 milliamperes with the wood beam with the transistor restricted with a small signal with the applications. Free air dissipation with adequate heat sink with a transistor refer with a question of the ability to dissipate no more than 120 milliamp watts with some of the external range of the dissipating with the transfer heat with the rating with the exceeding the noted below. Heat sink with the more transfer the U with the sum of the external device carry the heat away from the semiconductor with the additional heat sink with the U with the efficiency. It was improved with the thermal dissipation with the rating with the exceeding the sometimes the 25% of the sum of the milliwatt rating straight with the heat sink with it does not follow the transistor cave with the temperature with the 25 degrees Celsius Celsius with a being unit for the transistor dissipation range from 140 milliwatts, referred to as 120 milliwatts, of the ambient temperature range of the transistor, performing the current specification only when the operator is over the temperature with the established range with the limit of negative 65 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Celsius, to find the source operating spectrum. Alright, describe the function operation basic oscillator. Primary function of the oscillator to generate given waveform with a constant amplitude specified frequency maintained with a waveform circuit. Its oscillator is a group of the electron components which supply with a source with the energy of the proper phase of the signal sufficient amplifier to overcome the circuit with the loss of the welfare of the electronic periodic function repetitively. Some of the transient of the electron cube of the amplifier with the maybe cube of the oscillator with the circuit with the provided energy required. Basic oscillator can be broken down with the main section frequency to determine the device of the inductor capacitor tank circuit with the tank circuit with the normally found input circuit with the oscillator both transistor electronic tube should not be considered out of the ordinary appear with the outer circuit of the transistor oscillator. The difference being due with the collector of the plate current with the shifting independent of the partially responsible for. So the feedback circuit with the input circuit with the transistor 2 with the output circuit. So the TPT-GZ oscillator, both types of the oscillator with the 2 with the oscillators talk take place with the tune circuit with both the transistor with the 2 with the function primary with the electrical value with the amplifier with the feedback in the network automatically live with the proper amount of the energy with the input circuit with the same with the oscillation both the turns of the 2 oscillator with the feedback with the circuit comply with the energy with the proper amount with the phase output input circuit in order to sustain oscillation based with the block diagram shown with the figure 1020 circulates essentially with a closed loop with the DC power with maintaining AC oscillation difference for the type of the method for the feedback used. Figure 1019 draw the simple schematic diagram showing with a tune plate grid oscillator with a sphere with the plate with the include with the polarity to apply voltage with the oscillator with the tune circuit with the plate and grid circuits with the advantage of the between them become the equal with as well with the ultra high frequencies known with the figure of the induction plate tank circuit is not inductively coupled with the inductive grid circuit with the feedback system of the oscillation occurred with the inner electrode capacitance tube with the grid plate with the illustration of the broken line shown on the grid plate the capacitance with the inhere with the tube. Draw 1020. Draw the simple schematic diagram showing the Hartley triode oscillator shunt field plate and identify with the voltage priority shunt field Hartley or oscillator direct current that does not flow through any of the tank circuit of the plate with the supply voltage paired with the tube 2 tank circuit with the air and the radio frequency choke with the radio frequency signal of the plate supply with the DC that is kept out of the tank circuit with the blocking capacitor. 1021. Draw the simple schematic showing with a tune grid Armstrong with a triode oscillator shunt field with the indicating voltage polarities. The Armstrong oscillator perhaps the oldest for the oscillator you can recognize with the usually ticket winding with the incorporated with the and reduce feedback with the circuit pictured. Figure 1023 positive voltage applied through the radio frequency choke blade with a varying number of the turns of the tickler winding adjustment with the feedback fraction question. Armstrong oscillator often show with the FCC test despite with the fact with the vacuum tube with the version of the verse virtually obsolete even with the transistor equal rarely seen. 222 draw with a simple schematic diagram showing the tube plate with the tube grid oscillator wind shunt field with the plate. The tune plate, the tune grid oscillator looks very similar to the series fed unit shown in figure 1024. Only the difference is shunt field receive the plate of voltage directly from the source. Through a radio frequency with a tune circle with the makeup of the plate, tank with the connect with directly to the ground. Draw a simple schematic crystal control of the tube oscillators and the quartz crystal with the equivalent resonance circle with the committee with the plate with the usual tune circle the frequency control of the element oscillator with the circuit shown in figure 1025 with the common triode oscillator quartz crystal. Draw a simple schematic diagram showing the coil plates, oscillator, triode, shunt field plate, coupler oscillator, essentially the same in the Hartley, with except for the pair with the capacitance series with connected across. Tank coil with the passive combination C1 and C2, figure 1026, forms a voltage divider split with the potential curve with the resonance circle with the voltage in with the resonance circle with the opposite of the polarity, respect with the cathode right phase, sustaining oscillation, total tank capacity, capacitor 1 and 2, grid leak bias combination with capacitor 3 and resistor grid. Draw a single diagram, tune grid, Armstrong triode oscillator series feed plate, indicating voltage polarities. The series differs from the shunt circuit with the plate supplied with a note with the figure 1027 B by with the supply with the plate with a tickler with the wiring with a note bypass circuit capacitor with the B1 plus 1 line. Drawing a simple schematic diagram, electron coupled oscillator indicating voltage polarities. Actually, a modified version of Hartley electron coupled oscillator combined with the functions of the oscillator and amplifier, control grid, tank, and control and screen grids. Cathode series feed oscillator with a screen grid circulated the plate with a capacitor 2 with the screen at the zero potential with a radio frequency like capacitor 3 bypass with the plate supply with the output turn the circuit of the plate circuit with the sun only coupling path with electronic stream with the grid tank and the plate tank. See hence circuit name. Alright, 1027. The drawing is a simple schematic pentoid crystal oscillator involved indicating voltage polarity. Pentoid oscillator shown in figure 1029 is a good deal with a more common triode oscillator and crystal oscillator because of the less excitation and drive of the table. True with the full power output with the battery marked B positive with no other polarities are shown on the remember long parallel plate schematic battery symbol of representative of the pot with the end of the battery show with the pentoid oscillator shown on the capacitor C4 represents value may have additive with the simple supply with the necessary feedback with such oscillation and note with the grid leaks bias with the supplement with the cathode bias is developed in resistor R with the DC found on the cathode to play with the develop with the voltage power with respect with the ground since the lower end of the cathode resistor will effectively connect with the grid with the resistor 1 and choke with any voltage developed with the cutoff of the R resistor appear with the between the grid and cathode with this becoming the grid negative with respect with the cathode with the amount equal to the voltage drop off of the resistor and capacitor bypass radio frequency component plate grid and cathode resistor. The cathode resistor might well be referred to with a minimum bias report resistor of the bias voltage is developed across every time the plate with the current flows the oscillator circuit. The cathode bias with an independent oscillation prevents excess of the tube current where the oscillation stops. 1028. When the primary characteristics expected of the oscillator with virtually every piece of the equipment able to utilize the oscillator, the two main requirements of the oscillator, A, ability, stability with the frequency, stability of the rigidity with the release requirement must be dependent with the accuracy demand with the equipment amplitude stability refers to the ability of the oscillator to maintain the constant amplitude output waveform, less deviation from the predetermined amplifier with the better with the amplitude stability. Frequency stability refers to the ability of the oscillator to maintain the desired operating frequency, less oscillation drifts of the operating frequency, better with the frequency stability. 1029. What are the visual indications of soft tube? The soft tube characterizes a bluish haze between the helmet with the under the full excitation and also play current with the mayfall with the off rapid after excitation. What factors affect with the frequency stability oscillation? Frequency stability affect the change of the temperature of the tank merit Q, affecting the amplitude squared of the resistor loss, supply voltage vibration. Change of the temperature will cover the inter-electrode capacity to vary. It will also cover the slight variation of value of the tank of the inductor and capacitor. These changes with the shift of the output frequency. Since these changes occur slowly, resonant shift of the frequency is called the drift of the frequency drift to minimize adequate ventilation circuit components that can easily dissipate heat. In some cases, the temperature control system mechanical vibration cause some of the variation component value with the temperature change did. In this case, however, if the resonant frequency shift the more rapid the nature of the oscillator chassis is often shock mounted to overcome this problem. Various supply voltage will change the operating point of the circuit with the cause of the circuit of instability with this may come over the use of the regulated power supply. Load impedancy reflected the tank with a great effect with the frequency stability of the oscillator reflected the dependence to maintain both the resistive and reactive component with the resonant component with lower tank with the reactive component will alter the resonant frequency mirror with the tank with a very high with the reflected impedancy small with the effect with the resonant frequency with the tank mirror with an negligible lower with an effect of the mirror with the tank greater than effect of the change of the load impedance with the resonant frequency high mirror with the tank with the loss of the coupling reducing the frequency and stability caused by these factors. 1031. What are the characteristics of the capacity input filter system when compared with the choke input filter system? What are the effects of the filter choke with a large value with a direct current? Capacitor input filter with no load will produce the terminal voltage almost equal to the peak of the apply with the AC voltage load. Increase the terminal voltage drop like off of the current draw. The load prevents the capacitor with returning to its charge. The type of the filter with an undesirable application called with a large current peak with a peak current with the most flow with the diode with the charge with the input capacitor with the damage with the diode. So the output voltage fails with the output of the current with an increase with the type of the filter with the relative of the poor regulation shown in figure 1030 with the maybe the use higher with the wood over the load is lighter and very constant. Choke input filter regulation choke input filter with the better industry with the contributor speed with the type of the filter with the L type inductor type with the no load with the output voltage choke input filter nearly equal to the peak voltage applied with the AC with capacitor input filter high voltage same with the cover with the no load current with the being drawn with the capacitor that can be charged with the peak voltage however the if and only small load with the current is drawn with the output voltage fall with with a short lead, some lowered value. Load current increases beyond the value indicated by the point 8 illustrates very little change of the voltage, except with the which for the takes of DC resistant choke coil, since the voltage output of the choke input filter changes very little over the wide range load of the chain of the input filter has been good regulation. The use of the choke input filter prevents load current with the building up with the dropping quickly, inductive with the much larger enough the current becomes nearly constant. Inductive prevents the current from reaching peak value that would be peak value applied with the AC. The large value current peaks current keeps the filter output voltage down and the voltage remains quiet, constant, even though current decreases or increases. Name principal type of the power supply filter. The principal type of the power supply filter circuits are capacitor filter, inductor filter, inductor type filter, and pi type filter. The action capacitance filter figure 931 half wave rectifier output applied with the capacitor showing the AC with the input at 100 volts, the first positive of half cycle with the supply with the plate voltage 1. 2. The conductor capacitor 1 begin with the charge of the range of the charge of the capacitor 1 limited by the reactance of the transformer. Secondary 1 with the plate resistance of the rectifier. Therefore, the capacitor voltage nearly as fast as the input pulse. Input voltage start with the degree of the voltage of the capacitor does not follow, but instead of the voltage remains constant. The capacitor does not have a discharge path. Assuming the capacitor 1 charges to 80 volts of the first half of the input side of the capacitor 1 now discharge path with the cathode voltage 1 will remain above the 80 volt potential of the plate grid voltage. Must therefore exceed the 80 plus volts before voltage 1 again conduct. During the positive half of the second input cycle of the plate to plate ground the reach of the value greater than 80 plus volt of the voltage 1 goes into conduction, allow with the further charging the capacitor 1, assuming that capacitor 1 now charges 100 volt with no longer conducts into the plate with no longer becomes positive with respect to the cathode output. Of course, the capacity of it is now pure DC equal to the peak value of the input. Similar analysis can be made. Action capacitor filter upon the wave fill rectifier of the operation. Same with the exemption of the AC with each of the exemption approximate peak value E input with a much faster with the illustrated figure 1032. Inductor may also be issued that usually the filter of the component because of the ability to energy this form of the magnetic field because of the inductor resists the chain of the magnitude current flow within which will place within shear with the rectifier load then parallel since the inductor used the rectifier filters because the choke stops or the passage ripple into a load called the filter choke. Consider the action large indicator shear with the output half wave rectify the chain with the current with the coil with either increase the degree of the output with the inductor effective in the voltage output shown figure 1033 ripple has been reduced output not good enough for the most practical applications. We're getting to the end of this and we're going to cut the tape there at page 205.